I make the world as I see it. It's completely my work. So, and
but then it seems to be not enough. That's why people, and there is another side of this. You say, the world I see is me, as definitely. But then the thing is that it would be enough if everything was healed, complete, and wholesome. You would be in bliss. You would live with other people who are in bliss. The reality is different. Other people aren't in bliss. Maybe there are some people who may come back to the natural being in glimpses, but that means nothing. Well, okay, you just restored your natural being, but if you need validation from the external world, that's where we come back to the point of spiritual narcissism again, where you cannot just be content with yourself. You need someone to tell you, oh yes, you are content, because somewhere still there are bits and pieces missing, and we can fill in these missing holes, you may say, or points through the external reality, sometimes even unconsciously without realizing. But these empty spots are nothing but the trauma that we fail, we refuse to address, but rather we would fill it in with addictions. And addictions don't need to be hard addictions, drug addictions, everything. This whole projected reality is but an addiction. Food, entertainment, anything. So you may enjoy it without the obsessive disorder, obsessive compulsive disorder, or any kind of a narcissistic need to take from the outside. You may enjoy it if you're healthy, but the majority of people hide behind this. They experience something spiritually and it fills them in for a while. But then the fact is that their trauma is not addressed. So that black hole is not, it's still there. It's not addressed. It's not healed. So it keeps on sucking the energy. It keeps on pushing the person into this compulsive behavior to look for more in whichever area, politics, spirituality, love, anything, just to fill itself in with some energy, because the trauma is not addressed. That's where spiritual narcissism comes from, in any form of narcissism. It's a traumatic response to reality where somewhere we feel incomplete. We feel not like we're not enough. We don't feel content, no matter how externally positive and pleasant our life may be. Or on the contrary, if it's not pleasant, if it's painful, then we feed off that victimization and pain, rather than trying to change something and address and understand that we cannot go on like that. We have to admit it to ourselves, because admitting to oneself means I'm ready to heal. The majority of people will go, let's say, let's say they will glide along the surface from one spiritual teacher to another, from one spiritual teaching to another, from one piece of knowledge to the other, from one philosophy to the other, from one love affair to the other, from one job, career opportunity to the other. And so they will keep on gliding along the surface of life without really digging deeper. But the depth is the depth of that being, or the answer is within that trauma. Because the moment they address that trauma, they restore their completeness and wholesomeness. And it means they restore that sense of blissful natural being, or an ability to perceive the higher reality, which is nothing but true love. That is true love.
Yes, and the authenticity is just the being, and all the thoughts and all the stuff in the outside world is not the authenticity.
Authenticity. No, absolutely not. But that's why people create, different occupations, ideas about reality, to occupy themselves, to fill in those gaps, to fill in those black holes. And they are never satisfied. We created these different limited streams of reality. When we grow up, we have to make this, to do this, to connect to someone in a certain way. We aren't taught, we don't have an example of what true love is. So we create myths and ideas about true love. We create a meaning and a purpose of life through what our body does or our mind does, like career or some pursuits, ambitions, which in fact are relevant only to our man-made reality. And then we lose ourselves to these pursuits. We lose ourselves to the pseudo love when in fact we're devoid of love. That's where we're incomplete. Because when I say wholesomeness, I mean bliss, I mean true love, I mean God, I mean whatever divinity, because all of these words are irrelevant if you don't perceive that. The only word is just that, because it's one and the same thing. It's completeness, wholesomeness, contentment. The majority of people may only dream of it because their sense of identity, is corrupt. It has holes. It has holes that constantly need energy, black holes. They keep on sucking the projected reality and then also giving that light, whichever which still remains there, back to that projected reality. By the end of their lives, they're drained. They're like a burned sun, which doesn't have energy any longer. That's it.
No, they don't understand it even. Blissful emptiness. It's a concept which is completely
irrelevant for the majority of people at this point.
They cannot understand it. They cannot understand the concept of blissful emptiness.
You are not supposed to understand it. You are supposed to perceive it, and that's where you're supposed to have that shift and awakening. Because again, people just take words and create businesses out of these words. Yoga, awakening, Kundalini awakening. That's why I'm trying to get away from this, but yet, of course, we're living in the world that has been programmed by words and symbols. So it's impossible to completely get away from this paradigm. But yes, they look for all these explanations from the outside, and they cannot understand because it's beyond the logic. Yet they try to connect the logic to it. You either are yoga or you're not. You either are awakened or you're not. And yet, even when you are awakened, awakening itself is not something given like a unit. It is a process of becoming simply more and more aware, which is awakening, may also be called evolution, where you're just gradually expanding and opening expanding the boundaries of your awareness from the fragments of the individuality, then to the actual wholesome individuality, to the collective, to the universal, to the beyond imagination. And so this way we evolve, and when we evolve, we actually merge with more and more collective clusters, because we're getting rid of limiting information, limited forms of information, energy, space, time paradigms into larger, sort of a wholesome. And again, it doesn't mean that they are, to our imagination, large. They are just different frequencies, which could be for our reality super tiny, but they are different dimensions, and the different understanding of potency of intelligence and knowledge, consciousness in general. So it's a different frequency in just simple words. But yes, people cannot decipher it logically. They can either be it and perceive it, but even when they are that and perceive it in glimpses, still, if they do not understand that this perception is there to dissolve their corruption, and they do not cultivate that with the purpose to dissolve that corruption, on the contrary, they create more ego because they connect their corrupt sense of self, their narcissism, to this process of awakening, and boom, they stop that process by connecting it to that black hole, because the black hole will not allow the expansion. It will suck in the energy of that natural being and eventually will drag them into the projected reality or onto itself, where it will again consume that energy. That's what happens with the spiritual knowledge. Even if you happen to come across any type of spiritual knowledge, practical, informational, you've gotten some knowledge on some level. If the sense of self is unrefined, it will drag you in. That knowledge will be eventually consumed. You'll forget about it because the focus will be on that black hole. Validation. Who am I? Am I this? Am I that? Desire to validate and define yourself will lead to this spiritual narcissism even more. So even after the awakening, and this is the biggest trap in which I would say 99.999% of people fall at this point of time. Because to cultivate self means to cultivate that humility, which is allowing you not to fall prey to your trauma. Because humility, gratitude, simplicity help you to keep on expanding without trying to define yourself, box yourself, validate yourself. Because you clearly recognize at that point that these desires of recognition and validation they come from your
trauma.
They come from this unrefined sense of individuality, which has not restored its wholesomeness fully. It became aware of its natural being in glimpses. But it's like, as I explained during the webinar, it's like the sun that is full of black spots. And these spots have to be neutralized. Yes, there is still light there, but this light is gradually being consumed by these black spots. And now you're aware. So you have to keep on cultivating that light so that that light actually closes down those black spots, neutralizes these traumas, restores its wholesome being. Then you become that sun, that star, that wholesome spiritual being, that light body, you may say, is restored. Because some beings already have their light essence or light being there, but it is traumatized and corrupt. This light body is not healed, you may say. So that's why it becomes karmic, and it's more karmic than it is of light, because the focus of traumatic consciousness is on the trauma until the trauma is healed.
And it attracts trauma. And if you are wholesome, I see more and more that the world is just a mirror of yourself.
You see, the light itself, right? The light itself, the more you heal, the more you restore the light. So if you remember, I showed this picture where I drew the sun, which is having black spots. Now, these black spots with time consume more energy because they're not addressed. So they need to become more prominent and more obvious, because the only purpose for this consciousness is to heal itself. So it's not that the consciousness is punished by these black spots. These black spots are just natural accumulation of corruption through the down cycle. So now the consciousness at this point of the cycle just needs to see it clearly. If it doesn't see it clearly, that black spot just increases. It produces more and more traumatic experiences, so that the trauma grows. So if you can't notice it at this size, you will notice it at this size.
Yeah, but I like to have another interpretation. This consciousness, there are some dead ends. So if you are going in the wrong direction, and you have all kinds of complicated stuff, but in the end it's a dead. You cannot go any further, and some paths of consciousness destroy themselves in the end.
Yeah, I was just about to say it before you started speaking, that so at some point it grows to it grows so exponentially that it literally consumes the entire light of the soul. And this is how we give in to the darkness. So eventually, because we cannot understand that our human meaning of life has nothing to do with the reality of consciousness, energy, space, and time. Because everything is like this, everything is by frequency. You are only given that limited autonomy, which you can say, okay, it's my free will or something. In fact, it's a pseudo knowledge of some free will. It's in a limited sense free will, because again, you're driven mostly by traumas, or sometimes you're driven by your light. So if you're driven by the higher frequency, eventually you will be experiencing these spots, these traumas, on some kind of scale, because now your awareness is higher. You can spot them, notice them, acknowledge them to yourself, and somewhat dissolve, because you become more and more aware. Now, on the contrary, the majority of people are not aware. And so that's why they have to keep on bumping at the same issues, or come across the same traumatic experiences, but each time more and more, because with each incarnation, there is more and more trauma accumulated, simply because they fail to recognize it, or even if they recognize it, they fail to admit it and heal it. So they gave into victimization, and that's why the darkness have grown up. So each time it became more difficult, and eventually, if it's not addressed, they become a part of the collective darkness, of the world of the shadows. And so it's just like that. They become a part of that by frequency, not because someone punished them. They punished themselves. They chose that. They chose that, as you say, the dead end. But it's not the dead end, it's just that type of energy. And so they have to go through the whole cycle of darkness as a part on the individual level and on the collective. So they just contribute to the collective darkness. You know, this diagram or symbol of yin yang, it just speaks of it. It just speaks of this process of how we, but of course, like everyone has both sides in potentiality, because at this point of time, the consciousness itself is divided. It is not a depiction of the individual self, but it's a depiction of the collective. And you can be on the spectrum of light, you can be complete light, but, and again, darkness doesn't mean necessarily only corruption of a lower nature. It can be different kind of distortions and dispersion, maybe obsession of some kind. It could be even a beautiful obsession, but still an obsession. So some sort of a way one's being loses its energy to the projected reality. So it can be very positive as well. But so this yin yang doesn't necessarily speak about positive and negative in the human way or in human terms, but it just shows the higher frequency and the lower frequency. And many times we think maybe of something that is of a higher frequency, when in reality it's not, because the understanding of higher frequency beyond the human concept is very different. It's not about good and bad, of morale or anything like that. It's more of a frequency. It's the way the creative being is expressed. So the higher frequencies, the way the creative being is expressed, the directness, the emanation, the truth itself.
Yeah.
For humanity, the truth hurts. The truth hurts. So the truth will naturally be thrown into the category of bad, because it hurts. Because if one does not feel like addressing the reality within themselves, they will occupy themselves with all kinds of things in the name of spirituality, in the name of spiritual truths, in the name of righteousness, and so on and so forth. But again, all of that is corruption. Yes. You can be an amazing, kind soul, but you can be entrapped in other forms of ignorance and darkness. Yes, and you may say that will be your lower frequency, and you will wonder why you are not progressing or evolving, even though you're kind and empathic. People just don't understand all of these responses, whether anger, aggressivity, or empathy, or these are the human notions categorized into good or bad, but yet all of them are corruption. All of them are a part of ignorance, and ignorance is evil. So even when you think you're participating or contributing to the positivity of this world, you're actually, or could be, possibly, very possibly, contributing to the corruption of the world.
Yes, yes.